So we've got to talk about these two monitors right here. Now this one is the brand new Portkeys HS8 and this one is the current one that I use. This is the BM7 II DS. Now there is a bit of a price difference between these, $8.99 US and $3.99 US. So you would probably think, oh, I'll go through $3.99 US because it's cheaper, but this one has some pretty epic pro features, but you can see what's mounted on the back here. It's a video transmitter and it's power pass-through. We got to talk about it. What's going on, my friends? I hope you're all doing absolutely fantastic. If you are new to my channel, please consider subscribing and giving me a thumbs up. So we're going to talk about the first feature that I absolutely love about the HS8, and that is that power pass-through. Now this is very similar to what they had on the HS7T. Now that was initially my favorite monitor of all time because it was just absolutely rugged. It was a brilliant workhorse and it does have power pass-through for video transmitters. Then I actually got this one, which is the BM7 II DS, which was able to, control my Red Komodo X and my FX6 and Alpha cameras remotely, which is incredible. But which one do you choose? They're kind of for two different people, and I do want to explain that in this video. So one of the great things about this power pass-through is the ability to rotate it, because you notice my transmitter right here. I'll show you guys how easy it is. Quickly rotate it, put it back on, straight in. Now look at it. My transmitter is not getting in the way. It's pretty much mounted horizontally, which suits my workflow right here with the antennas not getting in the way. It's going to be powered directly through DC power. So that is incredible. Now I know on the Portkeys website you can actually buy something very similar that plugs directly into your MPF and then power pass through that, but it's only horizontal design or whatever your MPF battery design actually is. Now this one can just rotate in 4 different directions, which makes the versatility so much better. And if you are someone that actually needs to utilize the video transmitter, it's such a better option, because a lot of people generally mount their video transmitters on the side of their camera somewhere. It just makes things too bulky, too clunky, and things get in the way. This is so much more streamlined, and it's what I used to do with my HS7T all the time. Now, one of the biggest determining factors if you're going to be buying the HS8 or the BM7 II DS happens to be the size. Like, there is a significant size difference. Even though it is comparing a 7-inch to an 8-inch, the overall size just feels obviously a lot larger with the HS8. And you can see here, putting the BM7 II DS on top of the HS8, it is, fairly big. But if you are putting this directly on top of a very small Alpha camera, this is where you're going to notice a pretty big difference. But if it's on a bigger cinema camera like, an FX6 or an FX9, maybe a Red Komodo X, this is where, it might seem like the HS8 sort of fits perfectly fine. Obviously, 7-inch monitors are perfectly fine on that. It really does come down to personal preference and what you actually prefer when it comes to the size. And look, when it comes to the size of the monitors, it doesn't really matter for me. 8-inch, 7-inch, they're pretty much very similar, but what I actually like to do is hold onto the monitor with my FX6 because it gives me just a little extra point of contact. So sometimes I'll lean it up against my leg, I'll have the top handle in my right arm, and I'll hold the monitor in my left arm to give me 3 major points of contact. Now look, when it comes to the brightness of these things, this one claims to be about 2200 nits, whereas this one I think is about 1100 nits, and there definitely does seem to be a bit of a difference here. The BM7 II DS seems to be the brightest, obviously the HS8 is the second brightest, and when it comes to my stock FX6 screen, it's quite dull. These two screens definitely much bigger and much brighter. Now when it comes to the outdoor use, you can see here the HS8 is definitely much brighter than my stock Sony FX6 monitor. But if you do actually see the BM7 II DS, you can see that 2200 nits brightness does make a difference outdoors. But both of these are perfectly fine for outdoors. Depending on the viewing angle, it is a little bit shiny in some situations, but if it is pointed directly at you, you can see it absolutely no problems. Both these screens are fantastic. Now, some of the key differences between the HS8 and the BM7 II DS is the inputs and outputs. Now, the HS8 has a HDMI in and out, which this one also has, But the BM7 II has 2 SDI ins and 1 SDI out, whereas the HS8 only has an SDI in and SDI out. Now that 2 SDI ins actually allows you to do a split screen. So if you do, live video concerts or video podcasts, anything like that that requires 2 inputs, you can actually monitor it directly onto the monitor itself rather than having, a separate monitor to do that, which is pretty cool, specifically if you are a freelancer and you're controlling 2 cameras. You can actually see what that second camera is actually doing, and if, it loses focus or drops out, you will actually know that because it's plugged directly into this. And also talking about the I/O ports is that this actually has 2-pin LEMOs. So the BM7 II DS is a little bit more professional when it comes to the inputs and outputs on the actual monitor itself. 2-pin LEMO is pretty much industry standard when it comes to power out and also power in, but it also does have that DC power in as well, as the HS8 also has DC power in. Now the HS8 is a little bit more hungry and it needs 20 watts of power, whereas the BM7 II DS only needs 15 watts of power, so it only needs a little bit less power, but they're very similar anyway. Now, if you don't want to power both of these devices through the DC power input, you do have a dual MPF slot here. Now, the great thing about both of these is that they do have a little bit of a rubber stopper here, so when you actually clip your MPF battery in there, it's not going to, rock around and make a whole bunch of noise. It's going to stay in there quite well because that nice little rubber stopper there really just keeps it in there nice and tight. But one of the biggest things that the HS8 has is a release button. So this one actually clips in and locks directly in, whereas the BM7 II DS doesn't actually have a clip where it actually releases it. It literally just holds in there with friction, and you don't have to really worry. It's not going to really pop itself out, but I actually utilized the DC power directly into both of these anyway. And talking about this professional controls, like I said, this can actually do wireless transmitter directly through to your camera and control the camera's features. Obviously, it really does depend on the camera you're actually utilizing. On the website, it'll actually show what cameras are actually compatible, but I've been controlling my Red Komodo X with this. Absolutely incredible wireless. The main thing I actually utilized it for is literally just hit that record button on there, just because Red Komodo X record buttons are in a little bit awkward position sometimes, specifically if you are holding, the handle and you're, focus pulling on one hand. It's just easier to hit the screen rather than take the hand off, hit the record button, put the hand back on. But you can actually do wired control instead of just the wireless one. Now, one of the interesting features about the HS8 that I actually don't use at all and I've never used is the VESA interface on the back. Now, it's 100mm by 100mm, so it's pretty much like a standard, let's say like a PC monitor that you can literally attach the back to, which is pretty interesting. I don't know who would actually utilize that. If it is someone who's monitoring directly on here, you can do that, but I don't know many situations that I would use that in. I'm not 100% sure who would actually use that, but I know there would be some people that would utilize that. Now, I think the biggest differences between these two happens to be that touchscreen. Now, if you are used to using touchscreen on monitors, then the BM7 II DS has that touchscreen, whereas the HS8 doesn't have touchscreen. Now, when it comes to colder situations, and if you are wearing gloves, touchscreens on majority of devices is not really that great and responsive. That's where having the HS8 is obviously more beneficial because you are used to going through the menus directly through to the buttons, and it's just getting you used to that workflow. Whereas if you're used to touchscreens and you come to that situation where you need to, try and utilize this through the buttons, you're kind of not used to it, you know what I mean. But I guess the BM7 II DS, you can actually turn the touchscreen off as well and just utilize the buttons to go through the menus. Now, the biggest pro when it comes to overall design happens to be the mounting points. Now, there's 4 mounting points on the HS8, whereas the BM7 II DS only has the mounting points at the bottom and the top. This one has on every single side, which is really great, but they do both have like locking pin things in there. And that just gives you so much more flexibility to mount things directly onto the monitor, but also mount the monitor in different situations, different orientations, however you want to mount it. It just gives you so much more flexibility. So this is the HS8 right here. You can see this is pretty much the main screen off my FX6, and the waveforms is actually through my FX6 as well. If you do actually want waveforms on here, you can actually just go directly into This setting right here brings up all my exposure tools right down the bottom, so it's not actually on the screen, which is really cool, gives you so much more real estate to work with rather than, you know, being too busy on the actual screen itself. But I can toggle through each individual setting down the bottom. You can see here, I'll turn off focus peaking, which is this circle one. You can see it turns off all the focus peaking. This is the zebras. I've got false color here. And waveforms, once again, like I said, this one monitors my audio, which you can see down the bottom. This is a 3D LUT, so you can program your LUTs into here, so you can have Rec 709 or whatever custom LUT you actually want. But you can also put the custom LUT to the out, SDI out, and send the signal with that LUT baked in, which is really cool. Now, one of the cool things that I love about using this monitor for social media content is actually having these guidelines right here. You can see these are 9x16 guidelines, but the cool thing is, if I actually click on this, this gives me my rule of thirds within the guidelines. So it's not just the rule of thirds over the whole screen, it's the selected guidelines that you've actually selected. Now you can long press onto that feature. This will bring up all the individual features or functions within that individual feature. So I can change my guidelines if I really want to. Really depends on what you prefer, which gives you so much more flexibility. Turn them on, turn them off, whatever. Bring it back to the main screen. How cool is that? Now let's go over to the BM7 II DS. Now this is the BM7 II DS, and this one is the 7-inch screen, and it is touchscreen. So if I do touch on the screen, it can bring up all the individual settings. So you can see here, this is where I can adjust all my brightness settings or swipe across, and I've got my anamorphic de-squeeze over here as well. Then if I swipe to the next screen, you can see this is where all my features are. So the HS8 has the features down the bottom. This one has it on the sides, and you can individually custom where you want each feature to be. So if I want my record button to be at the bottom, I can bring the record button down the bottom, but essentially you just have it on the sides rather than obviously down the bottom. Now if I do swipe up, this is where you go into the camera control function. So you will have to obviously check on the website to see if your camera can sync with this directly, but it's pretty cool because it gives you so much flexibility in controlling your camera. And you can see down here, this is pretty much where I was controlling my Red Komodo X. It's got a couple of different cameras in there for different ways of actually connecting. So you can go through that LANC connection, which is really cool, or you can go through the wireless feature as well. But look, overall, it's pretty similar when it comes to the user interface. It really just depends on which one you prefer working with. You know, is it the HS8 or is it going to be the BM7 II DS with the touchscreen options? Now, one of the major features that both of these have is the HDMI to SDI converter, and that is pretty important, specifically for people who do HDMI in and try and send the SDI signal out to the video transmitter or to anything else. Because a lot of these devices, if you try and do HDMI in and go SDI out, it doesn't have that converter in there, so you can't actually have two split signals. You'd have to go HDMI in and HDMI out, or SDI in, SDI out, vice versa. So it is really cool that both of these monitors actually have that inside here. So look, overall, it really just depends on what you actually need when it comes to some of these features. Do you need that wired or wireless control out of the BM7 II DS? Do you need the two SDI inputs where you can have, you know, split screen? Or do you need just more of a rugged design? Do you need that pass-through where you can rotate the MPF pass-through for a video transmitter? Do you need a larger 8-inch screen so you can see and pull focus a little bit better if you're doing manual focus? It just depends on what you actually need, which one you're actually going to be going for. So anyway, my friends, I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please give it a thumbs up. I'll obviously put a link in the description below for the HS8 monitor and for the BM7 II DS that you guys can check out. Thanks for watching, and yeah, I'll see you guys in the next one. All right, let's get it.